welcome to the Innovation and Diffusion podcast. I'm Ruveyda Gozen, and today we have a fantastic guest, Camille Landais. It's great to have you here. I know you're from the LSE, and finally we have you as a guest here in this podcast. So to introduce Camille to our audience, Camille Landais is a professor of economics at the London School of Economics, and he is also the director of Stickert at the LSE and a member of the French Council of Economic Advisors. And his research areas mainly are gender pay gap, gender inequality, taxation, wealth, welfare policies. And today we will talk a lot about gender inequality, especially. We will focus on that aspect. And that's why I think it will be a special episode, I would say. Let's start with you first, Camille. So these are really important social and economic, areas to work on. But I wonder what originally drew you into the world of inequality, taxation, gender inequality, or those areas or policies. Were you always concerned, like socially or economically, about these issues? Or was there a moment or someone that somehow influenced you to kind of, okay, this is a good research area that we still need evidence on? That's why I'm kind of moving towards that direction.
That's a good question. We do not often reflect back on our trajectories to understand where we ended up. But if I were to do so, I'd say that, it's probably a combination of those kind of three elements you mentioned. First and foremost, yes, deep down you have passions, a set of moral values and beliefs that draw you into asking specific type of questions. And it's true that from a young age, because of family background, but also because of academic interest during my education years, I found fields such as social sciences and the interaction between social sciences and modeling and math and logic and philosophy deeply interesting. So that's one. The second is people. You have great mentors. For me, I could mention at least two or three. There is one that is very dear to my heart. It's the late Daniel Cohen, who's a professor of economics at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, in France. He has trained incredible generation of French economists, from Esther Duflo to Thomas Piketty to Emmanuel Fary. And the first course you had with him was just so enthralling. It was everything. It was passion, his talent for communicating ideas. He was a great pedagogical mind. He knew so much about economics, but he was also deeply engaged in public debates of the time. So that was very important to me. Then I met also at the École Normale Supérieure my future PhD advisor, Thomas Piketty, who was really important for shaping my own research ideas. And he's still a very important character in my general kind of research world. And then Emmanuel says as well was really important to me. He was not only a co-author, a friend. He welcomed me at Berkeley at the end of my PhD. And these are really important people who shaped my interest, my career trajectories, and everything. But then there is chance as well, and I think that's really important. There is some dimension of, the path is a bit haphazard at some points. Of course, you can post-rationalize it, but there are a bunch of ways in which you get interested in things just out of, a serendipitous set of coincidences. The reason why you're able to actually leverage those serendipitous opportunities is because of the deep down curiosity. So I'd say that it's the curiosity that drives you to react to these chance opportunities. But I think for me, it was just so important. For instance, the whole discovery of that gender agenda of mine was very serendipitous around personal events in my life, having kids and stuff like that, and conversation with Henrik Leven, my long-term co-author on these issues.
Yeah, that's actually a great kind of combination. You also are influenced by, economists, all these names that you mentioned, like Thomas Piketty, Emmanuel Saez, all of these names, other names that you mentioned as well. It's an amazing group of people. When it comes to the gender aspect of it, I think it's nice that you mentioned, your personal life had maybe an effect on it. Was it your focus when you were a PhD student, or was that an area that you switched to, after some time then?
So that's a good question. If I look back, what's interesting is that originally in my PhD thesis, there was a big part that was devoted to issues around family formation, inequality between men and women in terms of labor supply decision in the household, the role that tax policies played in it. But I never saw it through the lens of gender inequality being the center focus of it. That switched basically when I understood the amazing level of gender specialization that takes place at the moment kids arrive in my own life, but also around me. And yeah, I think then that really switched, even though I always had interest in family economics. Suddenly I realized that, yeah, that needed to be looked at through a much more gender inequality lens. And what's interesting is that deep down, if I actually introspect a bit, I'd say that I realized at this point how much it might have been in a very kind of unfathomable, deep down in the ground, influenced by my mom being just such a feminist and so involved in a bunch of these social issues and debates. But I realized that much later.
I see. And also, you're both in academia and a member of the French Council of Economic Advisors. Can you tell us a bit about your experience in both? Which one do you find more interesting? Sometimes, I mean, well, or maybe even more impactful.
Okay, that's a good question. I see them as, of course, going hand in hand. But of course, that's because a lot of my research as a public economist is tilted towards answering questions such as, oh, how do we improve policies? How do we evaluate policies? So, yeah, this is naturally oriented towards trying to participate in the public debate and debates about economic and public policies. But at the same time, I think what's really important is that I do not see myself at all as having any other role in participating in the public debate other than being able to contribute through my research. My interest in participating in the public debate is like any other citizen, I'd say. But then what I value is the fact that there are some specific institutions, such as, for instance, the French Council of Economic Advisors, where if you feel like your research can contribute to the public debate, to policy making, then you can participate in that debate. But again, I do not see myself as a policymaker, and that's never been my goal. I really see myself as, oh, it's good, I can help out, I can help people have better ideas or shape better their ideas about, how the world could be. And then my goal is to just enlighten them with whatever I've learned. But I do not see the economist, if you wish, as having a superior role in the realm of our democratic institutions than anyone else. We're all citizens. Some of us are experts on some topics, and that's great. But then you use that to share, not to take an advantage in policy decisions or in policy making.
I actually really like that way of thinking. That kind of also changed my way of looking at politics a bit, like the way you described it. So now maybe we can talk about your research a little bit. So I'd like to start with some striking results that you found in your papers. So in the one titled "Children and Gender Inequality: Evidence from Denmark," with your co-authors Henrik Kleven and Jakob Sogar, and you state that using Danish administrative data from 1980 to 2013, you show that most of the remaining gender inequality in earnings is due to children. So what is going on here exactly? Is this result, is it a conventional result? Is it unconventional? Can you tell us a bit about, this paper and this finding?
Okay. Actually, I think it's a great opportunity to share a little bit the way the whole thing came about. It turns out that at the time we started this research with Henrik, I was writing a report for the French policymakers on a reform of the pension rights of women relative to men. In that context, in the French system, there are a lot of tweaks to the system to compensate women for the fact that they have careers that are hurt in many ways by the fact of having children. In that context, I was thinking, okay, well, there should be a very simple way to get a sense of how much should this kind of underlying compensation be by just looking at the careers of women and see for each children how much that affects basically their earnings. And for this, basically, you would just want to run a very simple kind of using panel data, looking at the impact that each child has on the earnings of women. In the French context at the time, we didn't have such panel data. I looked around and there was one very early paper by Shelley Lundberg trying to do this, but with kind of really bad data and was actually, not super clean, the identification and everything. So I started kind of interacting with Henrik about this because this were a question of interest to us. And then we realized that, yeah, maybe we could just look at this in the Danish context, where the data there is just amazingly granular. And we did that. And when the first graph came about, it was just so flabbergasting. You could see this just, general parallel trend of men and women at almost, similar levels just prior to the arrival of kids. And then that sudden massive sharp decrease of the earnings of women. And most was striking was really the persistence of it, that after this sharp decline, there was never some convergence back in the earnings of women relative to men. And so that is really what drove the whole paper. This basic discovery that with very good data, but a very simple question and in a very simple design, you could start to understand what was going on. So here, bear in mind that what we're interested in is just the fundamental impact of the arrival of kids on the overall amount of gross earnings of women. So we are not necessarily interested in knowing to what extent that is due to discrimination or whatever. It was just a big, simple, descriptive exercise. But the beauty of it is that when you have this, you can then use that in a very simple decomposition exercise to say, okay, now this is the effect of kids. Okay, how much is that effect of kids potentially explaining of the total cross-sectional gender gap? And when we did that, we found that well, it was massive. It was roughly 80% today in Denmark. And interestingly, historically, that kind of child penalty has always been relatively stable. Decline in the overall gender gap that we've seen over the past 40 years in most countries is essentially related to decrease in all the other reasons why there is a gender gap. The fact that women were less educated than men 50 to 60 years ago, but that's the contrary now, that discrimination in the labor market has essentially disappeared, and many other things like this. Basically, we've been able to put extremely strong policies in place to change. But when it comes to the impact of kids, that's been incredibly persistent.
That's actually really interesting because you mentioned you mentioned the 80% is explained by children, which is a huge amount actually. And it persists over time because that was one of my, questions because, since the Second World War, actually around those times, we see more welfare policies. You see different types of, tax credits or those, different types of policies towards, for example, like single mothers, etc. Like, there are different types of policies. So so the fact that, the effect of kids on earnings difference hasn't changed is quite striking, isn't it? Like I believe that that was a result that you weren't expecting.
Yes and no. So in terms of just the magnitude, yeah, I was really amazed and puzzled and again struck. But what is really important to clarify is that what we're looking at here is really gross earnings, okay, not taking into account any form of redistribution policies or benefits that could typically go with the fact of taking a parental leave or that type of stuff. What we were really interested in here was getting a sense of basically the gross income that is generated by the relative labor supply of men and women. So, in a national accounting sense, basically what you want is to understand the allocation of primary income. Okay, is it men or women who do it and why? So, what that means is that when you look at the actual income net of government policies that is received by men relative to women, it is not as sharp as this because, of course, a lot of women who might interrupt their career to take care of their kids might be eligible to parental leave benefits and that type of things. But again, I believe that that's the right way to think about the fundamental issue, which is that what we see at the moment of the arrival of kid is an incredible level of gender specialization in the underlying tasks and roles that men and women play, both in the labor market but also at home. Okay, and measuring earnings this way as gross earnings is the simplest way to get at this actual specialization of role. So women decrease the time that they spent generating income in the labor market, and that's the key to understanding the child penalty.
Yeah, and at the same time, when you think about these tasks, kind of household specialization, how do you explain, this result? I mean, could we say that if you try to be the devil's advocate, like, do women want to do this and then they actually after some time they're willing to give their careers up, or is it because other types of reasons, because they lack policies that actually kind of that are unable to actually revert this back? So in your opinion, what explains this gap?
Okay, great questions. The overall child penalty in earnings is easily decomposed into at least three basic margins. The first one is the labor force participation. Do women indeed stop participating in the labor market or not? The second margin is the hours that you put into the market condition on participating. And finally, it's the wage rate that you get for a given number of hours that you participate in the market. If you do this very decomposition in a lot of advanced economies, you're going to find that all three of them play a role, and a roughly equal role today. So what that means is that the child penalty is not simply meaning that women stop working. Actually, a vast majority of them continue to work, but they reduce their hours. And even when they don't reduce their hours, they invest differently in their careers in so many different ways that get translated into differences in terms of wage rate paths, if you want. Think of, I want to be closer to home, so I'm going to find a firm where the commute time is lower. Great, but that's going to be achieved by paying a compensating differential. Or I want to work in a firm that is more family friendly and that offers more flexibility in terms of hours or taking vacation. Again, that's typically a choice that women do and not men after having kids. And that's paid in terms of lower compensation. Or, oh, I'm going to invest a little bit less into doing some extra time to get that promotion. Again, women tend to do that much more than men when kids arrive. And that is also paid in terms of lower wage rate and flatter trajectory. So you see, all these dimensions play a role. And what's really interesting is that when kids arrive, women change so many things about their behavior, while men essentially cruise. They stay on the same trajectory, not much changes in terms of their overall allocation of time, of tasks, of effort. Okay? So when you see this, as you mentioned, maybe your first reaction is that it's all choices. Maybe it's all choices. And if it's all choices, maybe women want it, and maybe it's all optimal. So I think the great question to ask then is not so much where is it coming from, but are these choices in any form some form of free optimal choices made by households?
So you also provide a very nice website called childpenaltyatlas.org. And there, if you go to, the event studies section, you can see actually the impact of child penalty across countries. And it looks like, the gap is even more visible when you look at the developed economies compared to developing economies. Can you also tell us a bit about how, whether that finding is strange or is it something related to the data, and why do we, observe this child penalty actually even, why is it more visible within developed economies?
That's, again, a very important question. And it's true that one should start by just stressing again how potentially surprising that finding that the child penalty might vary so much across country is. Why? Again, because a lot of people might think, oh, these arrangements, they're part of traditional gender specialization of roles. They've always existed, and because of this, we should see them across all countries and across all levels of development. What's really striking about the exercise that we've done in that child penalty atlas exercise is to showcase how much variation there is. Okay. In particular, at the same level of development, there is massive variation. Take Europe. In countries like Denmark or Germany, you have a child penalty that varies by a factor of 3 to 4. That's massive. I mean, these countries are very close, culturally speaking, and in terms of economic developments. Yet, you see drastically different levels of gender specialization taking place at the moment kids arrive. So that's really interesting. The other thing is this evidence that we show that at very, very low level of development, so think of extremely low income level, pre-structural transformation, it seems like there is no such thing as a big child penalty in employment there. But why would that be? Well, again, this is where the interaction between norms, economic structures, cultural development, history really matters. Here is a very simple way, a simple narrative, if you wish, to explain the lack of child penalty in employment in these very, very low income countries. You're at subsistence level. 80 to 90% of the economy is agriculture. everybody needs to work the plot. There is very little time, basically, that you have to take care of the kids, both for men and women. If you look at time use data, you see that the general time spent in childcare in those countries is roughly 2 to 3 times lower than what we have in advanced economies today. It doesn't mean that the kids are not attended by somebody, but in general, it's going to be by what we call allo parents, the other siblings or other members of the family or elders in the village, and so on and so forth. So what that means is that both men and women need to work. They need to work hard in agriculture. That doesn't mean that there is not necessarily some form of specialization of tasks. Women are going to be more likely to go fetch wood or to go fetch water. But in any case, everybody has to work intensely. And that leaves little space, if you wish, for a very gender division of tasks in terms of childcare. All of this disappears with development. Why? Because with development, agriculture essentially vanishes as an important kind of employer in the economy. Okay, so the structure of the economy changes. It's more formalized, it's more urban, and in all these urban formal salaried jobs, basically there is a separation between the home and where you work. At the same time, you're richer, you start being more educated, competing for these salary jobs, so you need to invest more in education and in childcare. And you basically create this separation between the time that you need to invest into your kids, that can only happen at home, but that's far away from work, and work where you can get these higher incomes through salary jobs. So that creates a tension, basically, that makes it possible to have this extreme gender specialization of role. That's fascinating, but it tells us something fundamental, which is this notion of the stay-at-home mom model. It's not a permanent thing in history. It's a relatively recent invention of history that has to do with the structural transformation of economies. And that, I think, is a really important discovery of that line of work of ours.
I think that was a great explanation, starting from, how these economies differed and then what's needed. As you said, the dynamics are changing. And at the same time, maybe now with the hybrid work, because the way we work is changing and how that affected women's productivity and men's productivity, or their participation in labor, because mostly work from home, etc. COVID also probably changed things a bit.
So that's really important. That's true. Of course, as I explained, part of the invention of the stay-at-home mom model has a lot to do with the inflexible separation between the place of work and the household, the home, basically. And flexible jobs can be better at this. At the same time, one needs to realize that now we're at a level of specialization in terms of tasks where women do not only more childcare, roughly 2 to 3 times more than men, but also much more household work that takes place in the household, in the home, such that even if you had great technologies that enable you to work from home, these technologies would have to increase the productivity of women relative to men in doing their job while doing all these other tasks in such a way that, if you really wanted to reduce the child penalty, you are talking about gains of productivity that are, really unrealistic. The bottom line is uh, flexible job can help, of course, but the crux of the matter remains the extreme specialization of actual tasks across gender that has really solidified over the course of the past 100 years when we had this kind of stay-at-home mom model that became so entrenched and so important, that also forged with it set of beliefs and norms about the place of women and the role of women in society. So that, I think, is really key.
At the same time, for example, like we talk about policies such as like parental leave, childcare. In one of your papers, your results show that the enormous expansions of parental leave and care have had virtually no impact on gender convergence. This is a really impactful conclusion. So, can you tell us a bit about this finding? What it means. Yeah, and then we will switch to your policy suggestions. Like, what should we have? As a better, more effective policies.
Yeah, I think it's really important to qualify what type of policies we're talking about in that paper. The policies that we looked at are parental leave policies, but that are essentially maternal leave policies, as well as childcare policies. And our conclusion was that, well, especially in contexts like the one that we were looking at, which is Austria, a very gender conservative country, You can give moms much more flexibility to take maternal leave and then go back to the labor market. You can provide a lot of relatively free childcare at the level of the municipality that has relatively little impact on the choices that women make to decrease their investment in their career at the moment kids arrive. But what is the reason? The reason is that, again, we are operating in a world where the norms are extremely gender conservative and where most women said that it would be improper for a mom to work if she had kids, that the kids would suffer. Basically, maternal input into the child development is absolutely crucial. And so there is in the kind of underlying set of beliefs, this very notion that, yeah, this is exactly what women should be doing. And so you have this extreme gender specialization that is based on very strong gender beliefs about what women and men should do. The set of policies that were put in place, such as maternal leave policies, was even reinforcing this set of beliefs. Why? Well, because by giving maternal leave only for women, you are explicitly saying that, yeah, it's a question for women when kids arrive. So the policies were not at all trying to affect both the beliefs and the gender specialization of tasks. Therefore, and that leads us to the type of policies that we should be talking about. It's the policies that are going to address the crux of the matter as we were speaking, which is this set of beliefs that leads to a very specific allocation of tasks. How can you do that? Well, again, through parental leave policies, but now through the parental leave policies, trying to force men to change their allocation of tasks when kids arrive, by forcing men to take more time off the labor market, by taking more time to take care of the kids. And that, I think, is really the set of policies that can have a massive impact on the evolution of gender inequality.
Thank you very much, Camille. I think these are really great topics, and I think this episode is special in the sense that your explanations I think are great. And we're also going to publish this in March, so I think it's an important time for women. So I want to actually kind of summarize the research part a bit by asking you, what are you currently working on? What do you think the research gaps are? Because I mean, there are PhD candidates, early career academics, or like PhD students. So would you recommend anything for them, in terms of the kind of the research areas and stuff? So let's kind of summarize the research part and then we will switch to the cheesy questions.
So if I wanted to summarize, what we've understood is that gender inequality, it's all about kids. So that's great in some sense. It means that if we solve what's happening at the moment kids arrive, we might really make a dent in the problem. The one thing that we've also understood is that it's very complicated to explain through the lens of our basic economic model why we see so much gender specialization the moment kids arrive. There are, of course, some economic forces, but it seems that a lot of it has to do with a set of beliefs, a set of norms that really affect gender specialization. So I'd say that for sure, one key dimension of research in the next 3-4 years is going to be to provide a better understanding of the drivers of gender specialization by enriching both empirically, but then also conceptually our models so that we can better replicate basically the current allocation that we're seeing. And that's a prerequisite, if you wish, to then solving the problem, which is now that we've understood why men and women are making choices this way, what policies can do to actually make that change happen. And so on this, I think there's going to be also a great area for research into trying to design the optimal policies that are going to play with all these drivers of gender specialization that the research is going to solve, that is going to reveal.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Camille. So let's switch to some of those cheesy questions. If you were allergic to one food, which would you be absolutely devastated to give up?
Yeah, it turns out I'm not allergic at all. I'd say food for thought, right? That's the one thing I'd be super sad if I were allergic to. No?
Yeah, no, that would definitely be devastating. But then you're not a fan of a specific type of food or drink or.
Lord, I love foie gras, rillette, all this type of stuff. Yeah, I could not give up. So yes, I'd be devastated.
Okay.
Yeah, there would be too many to
I see. Okay. If you could change something in economics or, in academia, basically, what would you change?
everything.
Explain, please.
Well, I wouldn't be an economist if I didn't love economics. So yeah, it's a great field. There are so many things to value in what we do. That being said, I'd say two things that have really struck me recently. One is why the need to be so smug about it. I find that sometimes as a general profession, but even individually, we tend to be very smug about just how much better we are in terms of the quality of our work, the quality of our methods, the research questions that we're asking. Uh, a lot of other social scientists complain about this kind of imperialistic way in which economics behave. And I thought for a long time, look, it's just because we're interested in a lot of questions and we're not afraid to ask these questions with our tools. But now I realize that a lot of it has a lot to do also with our innate smugness, and I'd love to change that. It's great what we're doing, but why being so serious and so full of ourselves about it? We can just be chilled and participate in the debate. That leads me to the second thing, which is but oftentimes, this smugness leads us to be really blind to the amazing developments in a bunch of other connected social sciences or sciences, broadly speaking. So recently, I've been working a lot on the issues of parental behavior to try to understand gender specialization. Absolutely surprised how little we as economists know about the recent development in the neurobiology of parental behavior, for instance. And I think, yeah, that has a lot to do with our own smugness, this sense that, well, we know better. Well, actually, no, we should always be curious of things that are adjacent to what we do, but that use other methods. I think that's really key.
These are great explanations. I mean, thank you very much. You also mentioned that you love being an economist, but if you had not become an economist, if you had another choice, and if you couldn't be an economist, basically, what career path would you choose and why?
There were so many of them when I was a kid. At 5, I thought that I would be a professional figure skater. At 10, a professional football player. And at 17, professional classical musician.
Evolved quite
I,
quite.
I did evolve. Is it a failure? I don't know, but I did evolve on that front. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. I would be a volleyball player, that's for sure. I love that. But I really like hearing when economists say that, they would choose a sport or something. I just love hearing, those kinds of kind of choices.
So by the way, do you know that I think it's Granger, the Nobel laureate econometrician, he was also a professional figure skater.
I didn't know. Very nice. Okay, so never have I ever questions. So never have I ever checked my citations immediately after publication.
Let's be totally transparent here. We're all, of course, obsessed about our citations, but for good and bad reason. I think it's important that we get a sense of whether our findings resonate and disseminate, and that's a good thing. The whole kind of obsession with metrics in the profession, again, I think it's a very bad thing, and I'm trying to prevent as much as possible myself from falling into that type of behavior. But yeah, of course, we check citations all the time. That's good and bad reasons, and you always try to convince yourself that you're doing it for good reasons.
Never have I ever went to a conference just for the location.
Always.
Always. Would you
No,
recommend that to us?
so, okay. To be frank, again, at some point in your career, the nice thing is that you get the opportunity to be invited to a bunch of different places, and because you cannot do everything, it is true that at the margin you're going to tend to prefer all of those where you know that you can bundle that with some, nice personal perks.
Yeah, I think well, I was talking with Alberto Bisson in a few episodes before, and he was also kind of like, yes, I would definitely choose the location first. But yeah, I think over time, given how important it is, and at the same time the location, I think it they become really good, important kind of indicators. So one last question, and then we will finalize the episode. That's not a never have I ever question, but another cheesy question, because I think in general people may have difficulties about this, like for example finding co-authors or becoming co-authors. So what makes a great co-author? Like you work with your co-authors in several different papers. Some of the co-authorships would continue for a long time, some of them just for one or two papers. How do you choose your co-authors? I mean, I'm sure it happens maybe naturally, but do you notice kind of a hint, or is there a kind of a signal where you say that, okay, I think we can work well together?
I only have fantastic co-authors. I've always been incredibly fortunate to work with all the co-authors that I have. I've always viewed that as so incredibly organic. You have tons of conversation with people. Sometimes the fact that one conversation turns into a project and a paper is, again, chance. But in any case, what's fundamental is that you start by getting excited by the level of curiosity, energy, of the person you're talking to. And that I think, is really a clear trait of all my co-authors. They are curious, they are fun, they really want to dig into stuff, they are energetic. So that I think is really key, because what is co-authorship if not intellectual companionship? You're along the same path trying to answer a question, and you want that level of energy, of being decisive, of wanting to answer the question. And that's therefore key to have these qualities if you want to take that long road, because it's a long road. Co-authorship for any paper now that take like 4 or 5 years, you're in there together for like a long time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I love your concept of intellectual companionship. I think in general, I mean, I really honestly loved your explanations and some of the keywords that you used. And hopefully our listeners also enjoyed the talk. See you in the next episode, everyone. And thank you very much, Camille, for participating. See you in the next episode, everyone. Bye.
Thank you so much.